Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. Today I'm joined by Michael McPadden, author of Genesis to Revelation, Abraham's Promise, Finding Christ and Seeing God. In this conversation, Michael describes his journey from Navy pilot to airline captain and ultimately to researcher of mythology. Michael discusses various translations of ancient scripture, and we discuss the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Michael explains Bereshit, bara, Elohim, or when the gods began to create, and that the name of God reads, I am, I become. Michael relates how the first chapter of Genesis explains the creation of reality in the same manner as quantum physics, and how several verses describe wave-particle duality. Chapter 2 continues with the myth of the man and his life, or the development of the human psyche. In Chapter 3, Michael explains the myth of the serpent and the woman, with the serpent a representation of our unconscious brain. Next, we consider the hero's journey as an outline for the human soul and how the Bible contains hundreds of heroes' journeys. We then consider the journey of Abraham from Sumer to Canaan and consider the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Michael then considers the physical manifestation of Christ as the key to unlocking our spiritual selves, escaping the trap of the ego. The New Testament starts with the call to adventure. That call is answered by the early Christians through proelpizo, or an early expectation of Christ. Michael and I discuss how belief is what creates our reality. From there, Michael describes the book of Revelation as the journey of the human soul. He relates the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as the lust of flesh, lust of eye, and pride of life, in pursuit of the white rider. Next, we discuss the historical life of Christ and the structure of the New Testament. We talk about how to be like children and how to pray without ceasing, and discuss the 2-step process into temptation. We discuss the meaning of life as to be conformed to the state of Christ and to become the men and women we're meant to be. We conclude the conversation discussing Moses, the burning bush, and the events of Exodus. This outro is titled Cosmogony, How Existence Comes to Be. Outros are available for this and all episodes at entangledpodcast.substack.com. Music from the show is available on the Spotify playlist Entangled The Vibes. If you like the show, please drop a 5-star review and subscribe on Substack, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please enjoy the episode. Michael McPadden, welcome to the Entangled podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jordan. It's a real honor on my part.
Well, me too. So I'm really excited to talk to you. You're a wealth of knowledge. So, I think there's plenty of topics that we can sink our teeth into today. So maybe to get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your life's history?
Yeah. Okay. So, I grew up in a middle-class family, grew up to become a Navy pilot. I got out of the Navy, became an international airline captain. And then I've always been, I would call myself a Christian. I've always believed in God. And, it just once I started to question the doctrines that were being taught in the modern church and the churches I was attending, it just didn't match up with what I was reading in the Bible. I said, what is wrong here? What's going on? And so it slowly led me, from one step after another to start reading the New Testament. And then I went into the Old Testament. And what I discovered in the Old Testament is that these ancient stories that we call the accounts of the Old Testament, the story of Moses and Abraham, Isaac, all the patriarchal fathers of the Old Testament, all these stories are myth. Now, I got to define myth. What is a myth? A myth is any story, fiction or nonfiction, that incorporates an ancient style of writing that I call mythical literature. All myths are written in this style. The myth of Hercules, the myth of the Minotaur, Adam and Eve, the story of Moses and Abraham. So you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute. That's kind of a bold claim, Mike. Do you have anybody besides yourself that's backing this up? I'm glad you asked. The Apostle Paul tells us I can't remember right away. I did look it up before we started, but I think it's in Corinthians. He tells us that the story of Abraham is an allegory. And what it means is Abraham was a real historical character, but his story is written as mythical literature. So we have the story of Abraham and Sarah, but we have another story, a symbolic story. And it has to do, like most of these myths, with the journey of the human soul, the hero's journey. Okay? I won't get into it. It might be a little bit too wonky right now. But the point is that these stories are myths. When the prophet Isaiah said that when the Messiah comes, he will only speak to the people in parables, and without parables, he will not speak to them. What that means is parables are mini myths. They're front stories, and then they have a symbolic undercurrent. For example, the story that Jesus tells about the man sowing seed in a field. It's a story. There was no man sowing seed in a field. He's not trying to teach us how to farm. He's trying to tell us a story through the symbolism of the man sowing the seed and the seed landing on the path and the thorns and the rocky ground. So that's an example of a fictional myth. There was no man. But Abraham is a nonfiction myth.
It's beautifully put. And to me, like, it gets into this idea of like these repeating patterns that you see not just in life, but also in the universe, right? Like this self-similarity of our universe where things can be both historically accurate, but also represent symbolically much bigger themes and messages and kind of stories that are applicable to entire civilizations.
And you know, the interesting thing, if you think about it, so I'm telling you, the story of Genesis 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 are myths. So you get the front story about God creating the universe. You get the story about the man and the woman in chapters 2 and 3. But then there's a symbolic story, a huge symbolic story that resonates through the whole. So what you're looking at is you're getting double or triple the information in the Bible that's coming to us via the symbology within the myths. Right? So you get in other words, the Old Testament and the New Testament is a lot larger and more expansive and more informative than we've been led to believe.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, it's a lot of information packed into this book, and we already thought it was big enough. Well, now it's triple. Now it's quadruple, bigger than it was.
Right. Well, and it's also been translated numbers of times by different people, different languages. So how should people who are new to the Bible, like, do you have recommendations for which is truest to the source text?
Well, there are none. Okay, there really aren't. The problem, the Old Testament's fine. You don't have the Old Testament, any Old Testament version. So you brought up a good point I want to talk about. You have to understand these myths from Genesis came out of Sumer with Abraham. So we can assume if they were written at the time, they were written probably in Sumerian cuneiform. Then they went to Akkadian. Then they were probably in some sort of a Proto-Canaanite, then Proto-Hebrew, then modern Hebrew. That's 5. Now you're going, well, wow, they must have really messed up. You know what? I am the world's leading expert on mythology and symbology. I never thought I'd ever say that. You know why I know? Because I'm the only one so far that has interpreted these myths correctly through their symbolic elements. But here's the thing. Because I'm an expert and I can see what I'm looking at, these myths are perfect. There's no mistakes in them. I point out when there's a few mistakes, a few late additions in the Genesis books, but they're perfect, Jordan. That's not possible, man. But they are. I'm gonna send you a copy of my book when I get some new copies in, and if you can hang out until we go over Genesis 1, 2, and 3, it's gonna blow you away at how perfectly written these things are. Like I say, that's not possible. I don't know. So you're right. If you want a copy of the Bible, I'll tell you what I do. I go online and I go to a website called BibleHub.com, and then when I'm looking it up, you can go to a Bible called the Interlinear Bible. What they'll do is they'll show you the Bible verses in Hebrew or Greek, and then with the English words under them, and an explanation of what the words and what these translations, why this word is this word. And when you do that, you're going to read a different Bible, a completely different Bible. Yeah. So And they're great guys. I tried to get their permission because I use them in my book all the time. And they said, no permission is necessary. This is a free service. Do your thing, whatever. So that's what I do. I don't really read the King James necessarily. The one I like the most, the one that's most, I kind of translate my own, like all my Genesis translations are my own. But the one I like the most, if I don't use my own translation, is the Berean Study Bible. They're as good as anything out there.
Okay, that's good to know. And so when you say you do your own translations, are you doing it from Hebrew?
Yes. Look, I don't read Hebrew. I can't speak Hebrew. Same with Greek. But you can go into an interlinear, and you can spend as much time as you want researching words and etymologies to make sure that your translation is as accurate as it could possibly be. So there's a lot of things in the New Testament that are pretty shady, I have to say, with the translations. One, a lot of these guys that were translating had no idea what Jesus and Paul were talking about most of the time, because they were talking about spiritual things. When Jesus tells us a parable, it's a symbolic story. You have to be able to interpret the symbolism, or you will not get the spiritual lesson. End of story. And a lot of them, they didn't understand that. And so they went, well, this can't possibly be what he's saying. Eat his body and drink his blood? That's crazy. So they would alter the text to meet some sort of a standard that they had. Let me give you an example. One of the things that Jesus talked about was aeonian life. Okay, aeonian or aeon is a Greek word, and it means age, like an eon, like the English word eon. But the translators translate aeon into eternity. Aeon's never been eternity. The Greeks didn't use it that way. Paul didn't use it that way. Jesus didn't understand. No one in that time thought of eternity. So that's where you get the term, I've come to bring you eternal life. Complete bollocks. He came to give you life now, in the age that you live in. So Jordan has an age. It started when he was conceived, and it will end when he takes his last breath. So when Jordan takes his last breath, that is the end of the age or aeon of Jordan. He came to bring you life while you're living as Jordan. Make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. That's what's the point? I got to wait till I die before I can. No, he came to bring you life now. And that's what he says. And that's what Paul says. And that's what all the gospel writers are saying this. But they deliberately misinterpreted to make you think it's something that you're going to receive after death.
Wow. And so then with regards to the stories of Genesis, is the myth that they were told to Abraham by divine inspiration, something along those lines?
Oh, no, Jordan. I think these stories are as old as time. In fact, I believe that the story of Job, you ready for this one? I think Job was written before the flood, 12,000 years ago, man. That's what I believe. You know why? Because Job and God are having a conversation. They're talking about dinosaurs. What? How would Job know about dinosaurs unless he lived with them?
Yeah.
Now, they're talking about something like a dinosaur. And there's no animals in our time period that match this animal that God calls behemoth, right? Mm-hmm. So Job is as old as it gets. And I think Genesis was written well over 4,000 years ago, if not longer. Who knows, right?
Is 4,000 years ago when Abraham's thought to have lived?
Abraham left Sumer, 2000 BC, roughly. So 4,000 years ago,
Uh-huh. Okay, well, that's really helpful. Well, then let's start with the beginning. Let's talk about Genesis.
Okay. So we could spend hours just on Genesis chapter 1, but we're not going to, of course. Here's some interesting things. I'm going to give you and your audience some tidbits that they can find in the book if they're interested of what Genesis really says. So you've got two stories going on in Genesis. You have the front story, which is the story we read, right? And then we have the symbolic story that's going on underneath. That's in the words, the symbolism. It's in the words, it's in the grammar, it's in everything. So here's a good example to start off with. The first three words in Genesis are Bereshit, bara, Elohim. That's Hebrew for when God began to create. Okay, so the word for God is Elohim. Elohim is the plural for God. So the way you should read it is when the gods, plural, began to create, right? But that's not how you read it. You have Elohim, which is plural, but the verb to create is bara. And bara is a singular masculine verb pointing to the plural Elohim. So you have a plural gods and you have singular verb. That makes no sense. This is poor grammar. Everybody's overlooked it. For 2,000 years, scribes have copied this over and over and over again. Remember we talked about the real name of God, which was I am and I become? I am is the singular God of monotheism. I become is the created universe. It is the seen image of the invisible God. That's what Paul calls it. It is the Christ, okay? Christ is a creation. I become is the creation. Same principle. You have three principles. You have from creator, the creation comes. So the creation comes forth from the creator. The Son comes forth from Father God. And I become comes forth from I am. Okay? So that's the name of God. That's how the ancients referred to God. I am and I become. So the reason we have the singular verb and the plural name for God is because that incorporates the symbolism of a singular God plurally creating the plural universe. So that's the type of symbolism you're going to be seeing throughout the book of Genesis, right? Now here's the cool part. This is the one I promise you I'm going to tell you about. The authors of Genesis describe the creation of reality in the exact same manner as quantum physicists do today. You heard that right. They did it in 2 verses, explaining how God creates the universe. So I have a large article on my Twitter feed if you want to go and read about it. It's not difficult to read. It's just kind of a long, you have to kind of explain some things. But take my word for it. Genesis was the first to describe quantum theory. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. It's crazy, and it doesn't surprise me. It's the same way with the Vedic tradition, and like the books of the Vedas follow this pattern between the sounds and the gaps in the sounds that matches directly one for one what I believe is called something like the Lagrange equation, something like that in quantum physics. So I mean, it's just
when the way Genesis describes the creation of reality is that at first it says God is the waters. That's a monistic God, one substance, the waters. Then God says, I am light. Okay? When God says I am light, by inference, he is also creating his polar opposite, the darkness, right? And so you have light and you have darkness. And then they describe God beginning the frequency of oscillation between, and the way they describe it is between the light and between the darkness. God is intervaling the light and the darkness, and he's doing it at a frequency. And that frequency of oscillation, is what creates the wave, what we call the wave particle duality, the wave of reality's creation. And they're describing it right there within the first 3 or 4 lines of Genesis. So it's pretty great.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, what actually takes place in the book of Genesis.
Well, it's a big book. I only did chapters 1, 2, and 3. So chapter 1 it's not about God creating the universe. If you're a Christian or just someone who just has an expanded consciousness, you ought to know God created the universe. To tell us that God created the universe is kind of pedantic, if you ask me. We know God created the universe, and that's why the real opening to Genesis isn't in the beginning God created. the real opening is when God began to create. And then it goes on to tell us what the state of the future universe was, which it didn't exist. It was null and void, right? So it's all logical flow. And then you go down, it's telling you how God creates reality as opposed to that he did it, right? So we know how, and you need to know how God creates reality, because that goes back to the human psyche and how we create, or we can be co-creators with God in our understanding of reality. So that's why that's important. You need to know how reality is created so that you can understand what your part to play is. Now, we go to Genesis chapter 2. It's not the name of the chapter is not the story of Adam and Eve. That the man's never called Adam, the lady's never called Eve. It's the myth of the man and his life. And what it does is it tells us the story of how the human psyche is created. We create the soul. The man is born as a child. He grows up. The long line of animals that are processed in front of him and he names are really an expanding self-awareness of the universe. As we grow, we create these maps of understanding in our head. And those maps of understanding in our head are represented by the increasingly larger and more complex animals. In the ancient world, when God creates the universe, he first gives it a form, the sun, and then he names it by giving it a function. The sun will be for marking time in the seasons, right? As soon as God gives it function, it comes into existence. So God creates the forms in chapter 2 for the man, and when the man names the forms, he completes their creation, which is indicative of him creating these internal maps of understanding with which we navigate our world, okay? So at this point in time, the man is still a child. Then we have God saying it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to bring him a helper. He puts the man to sleep. He goes off. He constructs something and comes back with the woman. So the clue here is the man, when he sees the woman, he says, at last, she is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, which means she is a biological part of the man's body. The woman represents human self-awareness, right? So that means she actually represents the language center of the brain, which is in the back of left half, in the left half and back of our brain. She's a biological part of us, the woman. Okay, so she represents human self-awareness, and when you see her at the end of chapter 2, she is quiet and she is virginal. The man has not come to know her. That's the metaphor. So you have a picture of the perfected man at the end of Genesis 2. You have Yahweh Elohim, which is God, and that represents the man's consciousness being fully focused on God, or in our heart and not in our head, right? And then the woman represents human self-awareness. She's part of the biology now. She was put into the man. What happened here was, this is how man got the large brain, okay? We got a large brain, the neocortex, and the woman represents that. And then the man represents our experience of the world, which is our body and the physical world around us. And that boils down to the human brain. Because the world that we understand lives in our brain, right? So you may be looking out at a computer screen or a pencil or something, and you go, oh, it's there, it's out in the world. Actually, it's not. You've created a map in your head, and you're living there, and you're experiencing the world in your head, but it's coming to you from your brain. Your brain is presenting this to consciousness, which is not part of the brain, not created by the brain. That's the picture of the perfected man. His full consciousness is on Yahweh Elohim. He's a completely together. His world is completely together in the human brain. Is only the unconscious aspect of the brain, which is what the man represents. And the woman represents human self-awareness, but he has not come to know her, and she is virginal. She has not birthed any children. Okay, so that's chapter 2. You get to chapter 3, all of a sudden, there's no God and there's no man. There's only a serpent and a woman, and they're having a conversation. The serpent represents the unconscious aspect of our brain, which was the same as what the man represented in chapter 2, Genesis chapter 2. But now he has a partner, the woman. She's human self-awareness. When she's talking to the serpent, the man's consciousness has left Yahweh Elohim. He's not there anymore. And he has entered into the woman, right? That's how we run this whole show. We enter into this human self-awareness and we think we're the man, but we're not. We're robots. We've entered into an unconscious machine, the ghost in the machine, as Rene Descartes said, right? But the thing is that the woman represents that aspect of the consciousness of the man entering into the machine. Now he has come to know the woman. She's going to birth children. And those children that our human self-awareness births when we enter her are the ego, mental illnesses, physical debilitations, and it's also our demons. Okay? So, there you go.
Wow.
That's the human psyche as described in Genesis 2. The woman is our human self-awareness, and she births the children who become our ego and our demons.
Wow. So how is Genesis 1-3 typically interpreted by the church today, by the modern church?
Completely on the front story, literally. No symbolism whatsoever. The man is Adam, the woman is Eve. They get married at the end of chapter 2. They eat something from a tree. They're cursed forever and kicked out of the garden. That's the story. We can't explain it, but you just have to believe it, and let's move on to something that's easier to talk about. Time to tithe. Did I say that? Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's funny. So then when does Abraham come into the story?
Oh, Abraham's the best part of the story, man. So here's the deal. So you have to look at the are you familiar with the hero's journey?
Yes, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah. Okay. I have a whole chapter on that in my book. The reason is the hero's journey is the journey. It's the outline for the journey of the human soul. Mm-hmm. So you might suspect that you're going to find a few hero's journeys in the Bible. The Bible has hundreds of hero's journeys. The Bible itself is a hero's journey. It starts at conception in Genesis chapter 2. It ends with all of us, you, Jordan, and me, everybody, walking in to the holy city as brothers at the end of our lives. Not after we die. Nothing happens when you're dead. It's when you're dying that this is occurring. We can get to that if you want to. So what happens is, so we have Genesis chapters 1-11. They're ancient stories. We don't know how old they are, but they're a lot older than 4,000 years. Mm-hmm. Abraham is compelled by God to leave Ur, a city in Sumer, and travel to a land that God would show him, which ultimately becomes Canaan. God makes a promise to Abraham. So I'm sorry if I keep going back, but it's a big subject. We see the fall of man in Genesis 3. What the fall of man is leaving the perfection of childhood, because all people are perfect as children. We grow up into the egoic world of man. At some point along the way, every one of us has done this. We went into our human self-awareness and we said to ourselves, I am this man. That's my mom, that's my dad, that's where I live, right? And so we start attaching all these things to the man. And so we believe we're this human being, right? And so that's where we have problems, because living our egoic lives, we're subjected to anger and division and drunkenness and carousing and all the stuff that Paul tells us. Those are egoic behaviors. This is why. And when you enter the human self-awareness, God is no longer present in your life. Now, he is, but you're not connected. The idea is to leave, to come out of your human self-awareness and enter back into your heart where God is, the present moment, if you will. Okay?
Yeah.
Well, you see, this book has just got so much stuff in it, and I could just go all over the place. I'm trying to stay focused, I promise. So you're talking about Abraham. So now, so here's the problem. So now man has fallen. We're egoic creatures, and we're stuck. What do we do? How are we going to find out our way back to the tree of life? When we enter the tree of knowledge, which is in our head, we've left the tree of life, which is in our heart, right? So we've fallen, we need help. So we need someone to come along and say, hey, look, this is what you got to do. That's where Abraham comes in. So Abraham is a really cool story, another hero's journey. And so Abraham, what his purpose in the whole thing, he's the middle of the story. He receives a promise from God. And what he says is that through your seed, your descendants will number will be greater than the number of the stars in heaven, the sands of the sea. And through you, Abraham, all the families on earth will be blessed. Paul takes this and he goes, okay, wait a minute now. The physical seed, one, is Christ, is Jesus. Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. And so that he is the Messiah, the physical Messiah that was promised. He came and he told us what we needed to do to break the curse and get out of this egoic life and go back into perfection like we were as children. Okay, that's what the physical seed of Abraham. But the spiritual seed of Abraham is Christ consciousness. Because although Jesus came from the physical seed of Abraham, the Christ comes to all of us. And that's why every family on earth will be blessed through Abraham, through the spiritual man, Abraham. So that's the middle point of the story. Now we got a promise to work on. So then we go through the whole history of the Hebrew people as they go from Canaan to Egypt, back to Canaan, into Babylon, back to the second temple, and then we have the birth of the Messiah. The New Testament of the Bible begins with the call to adventure, right? And from there, we enter the hero's journey, where we go out through gate after gate after gate. And every gate we pass through, we become more enmeshed in Christ. We get closer to God, a greater understanding of God, until the big day. And the big day is the day of the Lord. Now, the church doesn't teach any of this. The day of the Lord was the primary teaching of Paul, right? Because that's what Christians are going for, is the day of the Lord. Everybody, at the end of life, everybody dies and goes into the resurrection. That's universal. That's the idea that only Christians go into some sort. That's crazy. We all end life the exact same way. I don't care if you're an atheist or whatever. We all end the same way. What's different for Christians, and this is important to understand, is that Christians have what Paul called pro-elpizo, which is a Greek word that means an early expectation of Christ. As Christians, not only can we have an early expectation of Christ consciousness or enlightenment, if you want to call it that, we can actually speed that process up. That's what separates Christianity from every other faith on the planet. An early expectation of Christ. When you die, Jordan, you will see Christ. You know why? Because the Bible's very clear about this. Every eye will see Christ, and every tongue will confess Christ is Lord. Those are symbolic references. What you see in spiritual symbolism means to become. Job, in the book of Job, he said, yet in my flesh, I will see God. God opened himself up, and Job had a revelation of God. And he did see God while he was still alive in his flesh. So when the Bible says, every eye will see Christ, we will all attain Christ consciousness as we die. But if you're a Christian and you follow what the precepts of Christianity, you can have an early expectation. You can have it. It could happen tomorrow. You could spend the last 10 years of your life experiencing Christ consciousness before you actually pass on into the resurrection. That's what Christianity is about. That's what the good word is about. That's what the good news is that you can have the spiritual experience now, right now, today, if you want. You weren't expecting me to say any of that stuff, I'll bet, Jordan.
No, it's great. I love it. It's super interesting, so fascinating. So would you mind walking me through a bit of the progression of the New Testament? I'm not personally as familiar with it, so I'm curious just to know kind of like how the structure is. And then when you talk about the day of the Lord, what does that mean? I'm not familiar with that specific concept.
So it's not chronological. Okay, the first writings that we have from any Christian authors is from Paul. All of Paul's letters were written before any of the Gospels, or there were probably some letters like from James and the letter maybe Peter. They were written contemporaneously with Paul, but Paul was the first ones that we have. But the way the structure of the New Testament, it starts with the four Gospels. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptic Gospels, and that means they come from similar viewpoints. Essentially, you have three authors writing the same story from pretty much the same source material. So you're going to see a lot of differences in how these authors want to put things down on paper. But by and large, they tell the same story. They tell the same, they present the same Jesus with the same personality, same miracles, same parables. The Gospel of John is it's out there. It's very esoteric. It doesn't match up with the other Gospels at all. It's not my favorite. And then you get into the letters of Paul, Romans, Corinthians, whatever. So I think there's 13 letters that are attributed to Paul, and only 7 of them that the experts, say are his. But in the letters of Paul, so the Gospels tell us the story of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. So you get a certain picture of what you need to understand from what Jesus is teaching and what he wants you to understand. But then Paul, Jesus is talking more about the two most important lessons Jesus left us with is the proper way to pray and the proper way to believe. Jesus was really big on, hey, if you believe, it will be to you. In other words, whatever it is you believe in your head, that's what's going to happen. And that's how I talked about my chapter 1 about the human psyche. It's all about believing. The whole system, whether you're in your head or out of your head, it's all about believing. The believing is what creates our reality. So that was Jesus's message. Well, Paul, I'm not sure. I don't think Paul ever read any of the Gospels. So he was writing on his own. He was writing his own gospel, which matches up with Jesus's perfectly. Surprise. And but his gospel was more focused. The end game was more focused on the day of the Lord. This is Christian awakening. All right. This is after you've gone through the hero's journey and you've rejected the world and accepted God and Christ. But as you know, if you've read the hero's journey, you still got to get out of you still got to keep traveling. You haven't crossed the threshold back into the ordinary world yet. You have a lot of challenges while you're enlightened. So it's an interesting play. But this is what Paul was getting to, was the day of the Lord. It's just Christian awakening. It's what the Buddhists would call enlightenment. All right. So that's Paul. There's a couple other letters in the back from John and Peter. I don't really read them that much. And then you end the New Testament with the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a hero's journey for Christian awakening. It starts in the beginning with the call to adventure, and it ends with all the brothers crossing the threshold into the holy city. There you go. And that's the end of the New Testament. You're done.
Can we dive into the Revelation some more? And, what is the modern church's interpretation? And then how do you, interpret it in your book?
Okay, well, Revelation's obviously really dense. It's a doubly the reason. Well, first of all, the modern church has no clue what Revelation is about. They don't even try. No, they don't even try, man. There was a whole series of books that came out called Left Behind. Remember those series? They sold like 65 million copies of that book, the Left Behind series. It's all based on Revelation being about the end of the world. The Antichrist comes, and there's dragons, and there's monsters, and everybody's scary, and the world comes apart, and there's the rapture too. You got to remember the rapture. That's an apostate theory, I guess, or a heretical theory. That's where like Christians will be walking down the street, and all of a sudden they'll disappear, and all the clothes fall off, and they're sucked up into heaven, and then there's 7 years of tribulation with just all these terrible things happen to everybody on the earth during this terrible period at the end of the world. That's not what Revelation is about. That's ridiculous. Okay. Revelation is it's the journey of the human soul. Here's how it goes. Now, there's another place in Genesis where the model of the journey of the human soul is probably really simply and accurately laid out. And that is in the metaphor of the days of creation. Okay. So in the days of creation, you have the day where God is creating and becoming. And then at the end of the days of creation, it says, every day of creation ends this way. It says, and he, God, he became the evening, and he became the morning. Now, we know that the daylight is 100% sun all the time. So that's God. The evening has darkness in it, and so does the morning, a little bit. The darkness is the physical world. So we leave God as pure light. We enter into the evening. That's birth. We are as children. But as the children grow older, just like evening, it gets darker and darker and darker. And when night sets in and there's no more light, that is man entering into the darkness of the physical world as his own ego. Then our life is shown as us traveling through the darkness of night. At midnight, at the deepest, darkest time in our life, we get a call to adventure, right? And then we start to climb out, and everything's getting better because from midnight to dawn, it's still dark, but we're getting closer to the light. And so it gets better and better. And then we get the first ray of morning light. That's God coming back into our lives during the resurrection. As we pass through the morning light, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. That describes the resurrection back into full daylight. That's the hero's journey. That's the metaphor of the days of creation. So Revelation does that, but much, much more descriptive and intricate. So the reason no one knows how to understand Revelation is that most heroes' journeys have one encryption. In other words, you have a front story and a simple symbolic story underneath. Revelation is encrypted twice. So if you want to understand Revelation, you have to decrypt it twice. Then you get the story. All right. So first you find out what the beast rising from the sea is. Then you find out what the sea is. And when you do that, you have a story to tell. So I give you, are you familiar with Revelation at all?
You know, very high level, like 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and things like that. But
that's good. Let's talk about the 4 horsemen. So that's the call to adventure. You know that when we start our adventure, we have to cross the threshold. Mm-hmm. So first we get the call, then we refuse the call. We all do this. Then we finally accept the call. We get the blessing from God. And then we cross the threshold into the unknown land. That's the white rider. The rider on the white horse is you and me. He is described as having the victory. In other words, he has overcome the world, and that's in the past. In other words, the victory's in hand. But he does it because he is always overcoming the world in the present moment. And hang on to that, because I'll come back to that. That's an important concept to understand.
Yeah.
Okay. The rider of the white horse is given a crown, a royal crown, but he doesn't wear it because he's spiritual royalty. We are sons of God, you and I. We're spiritual royalty, but not yet, not as an ego. This is the beginning of the adventure. So we're sons of God, but we're also very flawed humans. So we're on the trail. So we have the crown, but we don't wear it yet. We hold it. He's given a bow with which to fight, but he doesn't have any arrows. He doesn't know what he's doing. When we start our journey, right, we don't know what we're doing. We stumble around like idiots. Oh, I'll try some meditation. And a minute later, go, this sucks. I'm going to do something else, you know. And so we don't know what we're doing. Okay, we know this. And so that's the rider on the white horse. The rider on the white horse is pursued by the three riders. They are the three sins of the world. There's only three sins. And if you're sinning, you're doing one of these three things. You're either lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life. And that's what the three horsemen represent that pursue the white rider. So in the context of the myth, they all start off in the same environment. So you've got four riders, and they represent one of four possible states of conscious understanding that any one of us can have. We can be mired in the lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life, or overcomer of the world. Four horsemen set out, but only one returns. We will always overcome the three sins of the world. That's what we do. And that's not the only part of the journey, because there's other things we have to accomplish, right? So there's a beast, the beast that rises from the sea of people, right? That's what that sea means, the sea of people, just like the seashore that is mentioned in Abraham. Rises from the sea. It has 7 heads. 7 is the number for divinity. This beast is not divine, but it's a hybrid. It's part physical, and it's also part spiritual. The beast is the woman from Genesis 2 and 3. The beast represents our self-awareness. The heads of the beast represent the various manifestations of our ego. You remember the story of Hercules when he had to fight the Hydra? Same beast. These symbols don't go away, man. They follow us through and through. So we have to fight the beast. The way we destroy the beast is by fight. What Hercules found out, now this is an interesting thing. One of the dominant themes and symbols in the Bible is a fiery flaming sword, because the sword represents the weapon we use to cut away the physical aspects of our nature, our ego, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. We use a sword, and when we cut the fire, when we cut the physical aspect of our body, it causes us pain, psychic pain, emotional pain, cognitive dissonance. That's explained in chapter 1. So the reason the flames are there is because they represent the pain of pulling our psyche, our consciousness out of the world, out of our ego, out of our belief systems, out of the human self-awareness. So, and it causes pain, and the fire represents the pain. Well, Hercules, when he's fighting the Hydra, he cuts a head off, right? And when he cuts the head off, 2 more go back. He learns quickly that if he uses a flaming sword of all the metaphors and all the symbols, he uses a flaming sword, cauterizes the wound, and the Hydra can't grow a head back. This goes back to a lesson Jesus taught us. Jesus said that if a spirit is sent out of a man, okay, that's the head of the Hydra. You cut it off. Jesus said, if you don't do something to keep that spirit from returning, it'll come back with 7 friends worse than the original spirit, and the man will be worse off than his former condition. Same with the Hydra head. You cut off the Hydra head, you don't do something, 2 heads go back, and now you're worse off than your former condition. These are spiritual lessons that are consistent throughout all of the myths, all cultures, everywhere. The Bible's no different. These lessons are there to teach us how to manage our lives while we're trying to make our way back home to God. Very simple.
Wow. Can we talk a little bit about Jesus's life on earth and what that story represents?
Okay, I love to, and I will. My book is more about the spiritual aspect and the lessons and whatnot. So I'm not the best person to ask about the history of Paul or Jesus and stuff. But I can tell you some good basics. I can answer the question you asked me. Let me put it that way. But just bear in mind, there's so many more people more fitted to do this. But anyway, so Jesus was born roughly, I think, around 7 BC. Died maybe in the 33, probably died when he's 40 years old. That's my guess. He was born into a typical a Jewish family in Palestine. He in Galilee is where he was actually. He's born in Bethlehem, but they lived in Galilee, which I think was north of Jerusalem. At any rate, he started his ministry. More than likely, it lasted about 3 years. So he probably started it in his mid-30s, let's say. And really, we don't know a lot about his early life. We don't know much before he started his ministry. And then, obviously, we all know the end. He was, crucified by the Romans. And then the popular, what they teach is that Jesus was resurrected. And so it's this resurrection is like the primary central part of the faith of the Christian church. I don't know why. So when Adam, or the man and the woman, however you will look at it, when they ate of the fruit of the tree, they became spiritually dead. Okay? God tells the man, he says, in the day that you eat of it, dying, you will die. So the man eats the fruit and walks out of the garden. He didn't die. He died spiritually. So the lesson here is he's not dying physically, he died spiritually. So the resurrection we're looking for is a spiritual resurrection. That's what the resurrection at the end of life is. It's a spiritual resurrection. You and I are spiritually dead right now. We are waiting for the resurrection, or an early expectation of Christ to resurrect into life again. So when Jesus talked about the resurrection, he did not mean a physical resurrection. When the apostles saw Jesus after the crucifixion, he didn't come to them as a resurrected body. He came to them as a spirit. And that's exactly, an internal understanding of their own consciousness. This is how Paul came along later, well after the church was started. And Paul said that he literally got his gospel from the risen Lord. Jesus came to him in the spirit and taught him everything he needed to know. And that's how Paul learned to teach the gospel, from his Christ, his risen Lord. But it wasn't like he didn't knock at the door and walk in, right? It's like he's having a spiritual revelation of Christ.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's that would be heretical. Though they would go crazy.
Sure.
If someone started, if I was saying this stuff like 300 years ago, I'd be getting burned at the stake.
Yeah.
That's how much they don't like that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing the opinions. I think it's time that people, take another look at the stories, because I think that's one of the ways that philosophical thought and spiritual traditions get diluted over time, is they get kind of consolidated into these dogmas controlled by a centralized organization, and people lose their ability to think independently and to understand that these people knew how to communicate messages at a very deep and profound level that, we have tended to forget in our modern era.
It's not an accident. Look, so there's a gospel of Christ. It was taught by Jesus. It was taught by Paul. It is what it is. There's easy parts. God loves you. There's hard parts. Pick up your cross and follow me. Look, our lives aren't supposed to be easy. I wish they were. I'm 69 years old. I think I figured it out. They're supposed to be like this. Everybody has a hard life, man. We all do. We struggle. There's good parts and there's other parts, okay? This is where the judgment comes in, the judging of the good and evil. Oh, I got a raise. That's good. Oh, I lost my job. That's bad. We're not supposed to be judging anything, but we do because we're egoic. The judgment comes from the head because we think we know and we don't know. Okay? So let me give you a quick rundown of the psyche and the role of believing and see if I can do it without convoluting the issue too much, because it can be kind of complex. So we're born with the seed of the woman in us, our human self-awareness. As a child grows, the human self-awareness becomes more and more powerful until finally the child enters into human self-awareness for the last time and becomes its own ego. The reason the ego is so powerful is because it gathers beliefs through its life and creates a belief system. So your political inclinations, the clubs you join, where you live, how you view yourself, every little opinion you have about yourself and your role in the world adds to your belief system. It makes the idea of you being able to enter into human self-aware more palatable and more real every time you do it, right? So we're stuck in our human self-awareness. We're locked in there by the belief system. So consciousness, when God created the universe, he believed it into existence. It's held the way it is in stasis, the way the universe is, through the belief of God. Jesus told us that we need to have the belief of God. And if we were to take on the belief of God, and we told the mountain to go into the sea, it would literally uproot itself, fly through the air, and land in the ocean. Now, the question is, why can't we do that? I can't make anything happen around me by believing it, right? Okay? The reason is when our consciousness gets locked in to our human belief system, that controls what we believe fully. When you go ahead, close your eyes and open them. Everything that you saw with your eyes before you close them will be the same when you open them again, because that's what you believe you're going to see, right? Your house that you live in, you believe that house is real. You believe everything about it because your human belief system locks you in, and you can't believe anything else. You can't. If you could believe everything I believe, you'd be here, literally, but you're not. You're there, right? So that's how belief works. Now, as we start to gain control over our human self-awareness and ego, we also start to gain control over our conscious mind. We're moving into Christ consciousness slowly but surely. And as we do, we gain control of what we believe. So as we move along, we start to ramp up. So the belief that we have is no longer controlled as much by the human belief system. It's starting to be more controlled by our own conscious mind. So on one end of the spectrum, a fully egoic person can only believe what the human believes. Usually they're atheists, because if you're fully at the one end of the spectrum, there's fully no God, all right? As you move towards the middle, you start to understand, open up your mind to, well, maybe there is a God. Maybe I'm making a connection here. And you start to get little spiritual revelations, which expand your consciousness into a greater understanding of God, the universe, yourself. And also you start to gain control of what you can believe. So let's take an example. So here's a problem. When you change a belief in your belief system, it causes you pain. All right, let me give an example. So let's say you decided, you've been a couch potato your whole life, and you say, you know what, I'm tired of that. I read an article the other day that says you should work out. It's really good for you, so I'm going to start going to the gym. All right? When you go to the gym, you ever heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah, same thing. You're like, man, I am so out of my element. Look at these guys, man. They're probably really dumb. Look how big they are. You're sitting there, you're really uneasy. Why? You're just in another place, but you're not comfortable because you are not the guy that goes to the gym and is comfortable. Keep doing it. So you press, and as you're pushing forward into this new life that you're going to have for yourself, which is a guy that works out at the gym, 6 weeks. You do this every day for 6 weeks, and you're going to be the guy that goes to the gym every day. That's how you'll see yourself, because you have altered your belief system into the guy that goes to the gym. Now, take a day off. You'll be antsy as hell. You'll be like, oh, I got to go to the gym. I need to go. I'm the guy that goes to the gym every day. I can't not go, right? That's how our belief system works. Let's say, for example, something major happens in your life. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. Let's say something, you got a car wreck and you're going to be laid up for a couple weeks, right? That alone is going to kind of shatter your belief system, because you are now the guy who's laying in bed, right? And you're not, and you weren't yesterday. You, as conscious observer, looks at your situation, goes, yeah, I'm the guy in bed now. Your belief system is program code, and you just can't change it overnight. It takes time. And the time that it takes to change it elicits a lot of emotional pain and cognitive dissonance. The reason you felt so weird in the gym on the first and second day, because of all the cognitive dissonances, this is a false belief. You're trying to tell me I'm the gym guy, but I'm not. So you have these two conflicting beliefs in your head causing cognitive dissonance. That's spiritual fire. So that's where we are. So what Jesus is telling us, so we're stuck in the human belief system. It determines our life. It determines every step we're going to take in our life until we change it. Jesus says, if you believe, it will be to you. There's another one I like. He says, there's a scene where the little kids want to go and say hi to Jesus, right? And his disciples are like, get out of here, little rugrats. Don't bother the Messiah. He's busy. And Jesus says, hey, don't hinder the little children to come unto me. This is the important part. It says, for truly theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. In other words, he was saying those children right now, as I speak, are experiencing the kingdom of the heavens. That's a clue. Well, what does that mean, Jesus? Well, it means if you can figure out how they're doing it, then you can do it too. What do we know about children? They live in the moment. They don't know nothing about tomorrow, nothing about yesterday, but they're right on point. If they're playing with Legos or reading a book or playing in the mud, you got to go, hey, little Johnny, what are you doing there in the mud, right? And Johnny's like, hey, you got to snap him out of it. It's like, oh, hey, Pop. I got a bunch of grandkids. Hey, Pop. But they're focused, right? In the moment. Those kids are constantly in what we would call a state of flow. Paul would say that they are praying without ceasing. To pray without ceasing is to live in the moment the entire time you're awake.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation about the most important lessons from Jesus in the Bible, and I believe you said it was how to pray and how to believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
Would you expand on those ideas?
Yeah, sure. So we find out the proper way. This is an interesting thing. And all these little lessons that you find in the Bible, they're not where you expect to find them, right? They're in little corners and whatnot. There's a scene after the Last Supper, before they come and take Jesus away, where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, so he and a couple of his disciples go to the garden, and Jesus removes himself from them, and he prays. He basically prays to God. He says, hey, this crucifixion thing, if it's not necessary, I'm on board with that program a lot more than I am with the crucifixion program. But then at the end of each prayer appeal, he says, not my will, but yours. Okay? That lesson teaches us predestination. If God isn't going to change the world and the course of the world for Jesus, he's not going to change it for you and me. So the overall lesson in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, predestination. Our lives are predestined. Okay? Because we're on a journey. We're on a journey, and God has laid this journey out perfectly. It's called the, hero's journey. It's laid out, man, step by step. That's what the Bible says. Now, the question was, so Jesus comes back from praying, and his disciples are asleep. It's 3 a.m. Of course they're asleep. And he says, hey, wake up. He says, stay alert and pray, so that you do not fall into temptation. That's the key. Here's what he's saying. The word for alert is the Greek word gregorio. Gregorio means to be alert, to be awake in the night, like a military sentry. So right now, you and I are in the night, trying to work our way to the dawn, you and I. And so he said, we're awake in the night, and it's hard to do, right? So gregorio implies you're awake, but you'd rather be sleeping. So you have to work at being awake. That's alert. Alert, if you think about it, what does it mean? No daydreaming, no thinking, no talking, no past, no present, totally out of the head with just a single point of focus, which is really a state of prayer. When you do that, you enter into a state of prayer. No thinking, no talking. As soon as you enter your head, start thinking, you're out of the state of prayer. You enter the state of prayer by existing within the present moment. You enter into the tree of life in your heart, where the throne of God is, where God is on the throne, okay? So that's the present moment. So you're alert in the present moment. That automatically puts you in to a state of prayer. You shut down the thinking brain, you enter into the tree of life. Now, he says, you will not fall into temptation. What is temptation? Temptation is a two-step process. The symbolism of the two-step process for temptation is, at the tree, it's you hear the sound of your woman, and then you answer the call when she gives you the fruit. Okay? So first you hear the sound. At the time, the man heard the sound of Yahweh Elohim, God, coming into the garden, but he heeded the sound of his woman. Okay, that was his choice. He had a choice between the sound of God, the sound of when he chose the woman. That's the first step to temptation. Then we act. We reach out our hand and take the fruit, and then we eat it. In Revelation, it's she pours the cup of the wine of her prostitution. She gives you the cup, and then you drink it. So it's always a two-step process to enter into temptation. You have to, the first step to enter into temptation is to leave the tree of life, right? The heart, state of prayer. You enter into the head, okay? Or you enter in, and that's taking the fruit of the tree and eating it and becoming your ego, okay? So the way we pray is you sit quietly before God, no thinking. You got to get out of your head, go into the heart. It's meditation without the noise. No om, no ahs, no chanting, okay? Nothing. You quiet the mind, you enter your heart, you're in a state of prayer. That's pure prayer. Now, believing is using your mind conceptually. This is different. No words, no thinking, you're in your mind. Mind is outside of the brain. You can enter the mind without being in the brain. You're in the mind. And when you enter the mind, you conceptually imagine what you want your life to be, right? So for a Christian, it's you want to be conformed to the image of Christ. That's how Paul puts it. So that's what you're believing. So you're Jordan today. You're saying to yourself, hey, I want to be a better Jordan. How do I do that? Well, it's not that hard. You know what you have to do. You know what you have. I can't tell you, but you know what you have to do to be a better person. So I don't know. I do this thing that I don't think is really a good thing to do. So you don't think about the thing. You just reinforce it. You think about a life that's excluding it, right? You think of everything but that. And so Paul tells us, I do not think about the things behind. I think about the things ahead, the goal, the prize that I want to take, which is to be conformed to the image of Christ. Very simple. So we enter the state of prayer by shutting down thought, and we believe, which is the act of mind, joining God's mind, co-creating our future to become the man that we want to be. Pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
I ain't making this up. It's all the New Testament, man.
It's great. It's great. So maybe taking a step back, I would love to talk about Moses in the story of the burning bush.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool, too. There's so much that's going on at there that God's talking to Moses about. We'll just talk about the burning bush. So Moses is a great character. The story goes, he was Jewish. He was born to a Jewish family. Pharaoh decided to kill the firstborn of the family. So Moses' mother puts him in a reed boat on the Nile. A princess from the royal house sees him, adopts him, and raises Moses as her own, names him Moses, and then raises him as her own. He comes of age in Pharaoh's court. That's important because the Jews, the Hebrews that were in Egypt were slaves. They would get up, they would make bricks all day long and go to bed, right? They get up, make bricks all day, go to bed. Moses was being taught how to administer a nation state. That's important, right? So when Moses is a young man, one day he goes out, he sees an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave. And he intervenes and in the process kills the overseer, buries the body in the desert, and goes home. He goes out the next day and nobody says anything. So he says, hey, I might have got away with that. So then he sees two Hebrew slaves fighting between themselves. So he goes to break them up. He says, stop that fighting. And one of them turns to Moses and says, oh, what are you going to do? Kill me and bury me in the desert too? Dun, 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 right? So not only did they know about it, but Pharaoh knew about it. He was not happy. So Moses figures it out, super smart guy. He bolts and makes a run for the border and gets across the border into the land of Midian. Then he spends 40 years as a herder in the land of Midian before he comes across the burning bush, right? And so there's no real significance to it symbolically that I can discern. But basically what God says is he says, look, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back to Egypt and you're going to free my people and lead them back to freedom. And Moses is like, well, who am I? I'm a goat herder. You got the wrong guy, right? It's great because he's backing out. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. The hero's, he's refusing the call to adventure. God says, no, we're going to do this. It's all going to be great, right? So Moses goes, all right, fine. He says, if I go to the sons of Israel and I tell them this crazy story and they go, oh yeah, well, what is the name of the God who talked to you? He goes, what should I tell them? And that's where God tells them in Hebrew, you will tell the sons of Israel that Ayeh, Asur, Ayeh has sent me to you. And so that translates, that's where they get the I am that I am. I am that I am it doesn't mean anything in English. It's ridiculous. But I am and I become makes sense. And that's the real name of God. I am and I become, two verbs, but they're opposite of each other. So that's what happened at the burning bush. And of course, the rest is history. Moses goes back and he tells the sons of Israel, so you're not going to believe what happened, but this thing at the burning bush. And they're like, all right, well, what was his name? He goes, it was weird, man. It was like, I am and I become. They said, stand by. They go to their holy books, which is Genesis, that they got from Abraham. They go, well, okay, he's got the name down. I guess we're leaving Egypt, right? That's the story.
Wow.
So it's a typical hero's journey. Of course, they cross the threshold, which is the Red Sea. They're baptized, right? They end up in the wilderness. That's where you and I are right now in our own personal hero's journey. They spend 40 years. Why 40 years? 40 years is 2 generations. Not one of the people who were slaves in Egypt entered the promised land. Do you know why? You can't enter the promised land with a slave mindset. You and I are slaves to our human self-awareness and our human belief system. That's why we're predestined. The human animal, the human machine is a program. Our head is just a program code. There's no life here. There's no consciousness here. Consciousness comes from our heart. So this robot will do whatever the program code tells them. You don't have free will. So, for example, when I hang up, I will get up from this chair and I will follow a pre-programmed series of steps that I will do. I will go up to the kitchen. I'll go see my wife. I'll tell her what's going on. Whatever's happening, it's all program code. You and I are slaves to the program code in our heads. We don't have a choice as to what it's going to do. But we can change the program code slowly over time, which I've already talked about. Our belief system. You can change your life by changing your belief system, and we do it through believing. We believe the belief system into something that it is not today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
I know this is nuts. This is crazy,
No,
but
it's beautiful. It's awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been such a fun conversation. If folks want to learn more about you or where they can find your book, Genesis to Revelation, Abraham's Promise, Finding Christ and Seeing God, where should they go?
Well, you can go to my website, which is www.michael-mcpadden.com. And there you just click a page and there's a buy. It'll take you to the website and it's on Amazon. Or you can go to Amazon, type in Abraham or type in Genesis to Revelation by author Michael McPadden. I thought I had a unique name. Apparently not. There's a lot of Genesis to Revelation, so you have to look for Michael McPadden. I have a Twitter feed, which I upload regular articles. Like I explain how Genesis explains quantum theory. I talk about what happened with Noah, just little things that I put up there once a day. I usually put something up. It's Genesis to Rev Twitter, and then yeah, I guess that's it. It's just my website, the Amazon site, and then my Twitter feed. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordan. This has been a lot of fun. It really has. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
Genesis. Preamble, the creation of the world. Chapter 1. The story of creation. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form or shape, with darkness over the abyss and a mighty wind sweeping over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good. God then separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Evening came, and morning followed, the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the waters, to separate one body of water from the other." God made the dome, and it separated the water below the dome from the water above the dome. And so it happened. God called the dome sky. Evening came, and morning followed, the second day. Then God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into a single basin, so that the dry land may appear." And so it happened. The water under the sky was gathered into its basin, and the dry land appeared. God called the dry land earth, and the basin of water he called sea. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation, every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree on earth that bears fruit with its seed in it." And so it happened. The earth brought forth vegetation, every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree that bears fruit with its seed in it. God saw that it was good. Evening came, and morning followed, the third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky, to separate day from night. Let them mark the seasons, the days, and the years, and serve as lights in the dome of the sky to illuminate the earth." And so it happened. God made the two great lights, the greater one to govern the day, and the lesser one to govern the night and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to illuminate the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. Evening came, and morning followed, the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the water teem with an abundance of living creatures, and on the earth let birds fly beneath the dome of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all kinds of crawling living creatures with which the water teems, and all kinds of winged birds. God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile, multiply, and fill the water of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening came, and morning followed, the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, tame animals, crawling things, and every kind of wild animal." And so it happened. God made every kind of wild animal, every kind of tame animal, and every kind of thing that crawls on the ground. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the tame animals, all the wild animals, and all the creatures that crawl on the earth." God created mankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fertile and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that crawl on the earth." God also said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing fruit on it to be birds of the air, and all the living creatures that crawl on the earth. I give all the green plants for food." And so it happened. God looked at everything he had made and found it very good. Evening came and morning followed, the sixth day. Chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth and all their array was completed. On the seventh day God completed the work he had been doing. He rested on the seventh day from all the work he had undertaken. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work he had done in creation. Thus begins the book of Genesis, a story of cosmogony, how existence comes to be. The translation I shared comes from the New American Bible. Genesis begins the Old Testament, scriptures originally written in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are referred to as the Pentateuch. Jewish tradition refers to the Pentateuch as Torah, teaching, or law, because of their focus on the Sinai covenant and legislation mediated through Moses. The Pentateuch relates a cosmogonic story of God creating the world and destining humanity for the blessings of progeny and land possession. Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:3 provides the 7-day creation account, which makes clear that God created a beautiful universe in which human beings are an integral and important part. Genesis 2:4 to Genesis 3:24, often referred to as the second creation story, describes the flood and repopulation of humanity. Cosmogony has been described as the flow of reality into nature and back. If that's the case, then the Bible is itself another fractal of our origin story. And if we skip ahead to the end, we find yet another story of cosmogony, the book of Revelation. The New Testament relates the stories and teachings of Jesus Christ. The writings begin with 4 Gospels, then the Acts of Apostles, followed by 21 letters attributed to Paul, James, Peter, John, and Jude, and the scriptures conclude with the Revelation to John. The Revelation to John, or the Apocalypse, is one of the most difficult to understand due to its unfamiliar and extravagant symbolism. The book was composed to meet the crisis of ruthless persecution of the early Christians by the Roman authorities. The author was identified as the Apostle John by some church fathers, but his authorship is disputed by others. Because of his Christian faith, John had been exiled to the island of Patmos, a Roman penal colony, where he was visited by an angel. The Revelation provides guidance to Christians to stand firm in their faith and to avoid compromise with paganism. The triumph of God in the world of men and women remains a mystery, to be accepted in faith and longed for in hope. Ultimate salvation and victory are said to take place at the end of the present age, when Christ will come in glory at the parousia. Christ's overwhelming defeat of the kingdom of Satan ushers in the everlasting reign of God. The book of Revelation is structured as first, prologue, second, letters to the churches of Asia, third, God and the Lamb in heaven, fourth, the 7 seals, trumpets, and plagues with interludes, 5, the punishment of Babylon and the destruction of pagan nations, 6, the new creation, and 7th, epilogue. I'll leave you with the epilogue now. The book of Revelation, epilogue. And he said to me, "These words are trustworthy and true, and the Lord, the God of prophetic spirits, sent his angel to show his servants what must happen soon. Behold, I am coming soon. Blessed is the one who keeps the prophetic message of this book." It is I, John, who heard and saw these things, and when I heard and saw them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed them to me. But he said to me, "Don't. I am a fellow servant of yours, and of your brothers the prophets, and of those who keep the message of this book. Worship God." Then he said to me, "Do not seal up the prophetic words of this book, for the appointed time is near. Let the wicked still act wickedly, and the filthy still be filthy. The righteous must still do right, and the holy still be holy. Behold, I am coming soon. I bring with me the recompense I will give to each according to his deeds. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are they who wash their robes so as to have the right to the tree of life and enter the city through its gates. Outside are the dogs, the sorcerers, the unchaste, the murderers, the idol worshippers, and all who love and practice deceit. I, Jesus, send my angel to give you the testimony for the churches. I am the root and offspring of David, the bright morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Let the hearers say, "Come." Let the one who thirsts come forward, and the one who wants it receive the gift of life-giving water. I warn everyone who hears the prophetic words in this book, if anyone adds to them, God will add him to the plagues described in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words in this prophetic book, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city described in this book. The one who gives this testimony says, yes, I am coming soon. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. The grace of Lord Jesus be with all.